So Dr. Bishara is a senior faculty member in the Program for Multilingual Education, School of Education at Tel Aviv University. Her main research interests are applied linguistics, EFL multilingual education in conflict reading contexts, critical pedagogies, language ideologies, and language policy and planning, with a special emphasis on the EFL education of Palestinians in Israel. She's also interested in examining the ways in which power imbalances are reproduced and or contested through semiotic means. She has published peer-reviewed articles in leading journals such as Applied Linguistics and TESOL Quarterly, and is the author of EFL Pedagogy as Cultural Discourse, Textbook, Practice and Policy for Arabs and Jews in Israel. Dr. Bishara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, for this introduction. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And thanks for Dr. Makani for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. Allow me first to share my screen. All right. Yes. Can you all see my screen? Thank you. Allow me, before I start, I would like to begin by paying a tribute to the 5 Palestinians who were killed yesterday in a crime-related shooting in a town termed Diaft al-Nasri near Nazareth. Yesterday's fatalities add to the 97 Palestinians who were killed due to criminal violence in 2023. The slogan, "We want to live, بدنا نعيش, רוצים לחיות," that you see on the screen, has been launched yesterday and has been running in social media as part of condemning the reluctance of the Israeli government to intervene and fight the crime that has been taking over the Palestinian community in the last few years. Thank you. So I'll begin my talk today with introducing or giving you a background on the Palestinians in Israel and also on the May 2021 events that appear in my abstract. So the Palestinians that I refer to in my talk are actually the Palestinian citizens in Israel who constitute some 21% of Israel's population. While they used to be the majority before the establishment of Israel in 1948, Palestinians live today as an actively marginalized minority and as second-class citizens in a country that defines itself as Jewish and then as democratic. Israel's prioritization of its Jewishness over its democratic nature was manifested most substantially in July 2018, when the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, passed the nation-state law that defines Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people alone. The law not only reinforced the second-class citizenship of the Palestinian citizens, but also transformed the status of Arabic, which is the mother tongue of the Palestinians, from an official language to a language with a special status. Within the ongoing Palestinian struggle against Israel's settler colonial policies, May 2021 marks an important point. Uprisings in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah began as the Israeli Supreme Court was expected to deliver a ruling on whether to uphold the eviction of 6 Palestinian families from their neighborhood on May 10, 2021. The uprisings in Jerusalem soon accelerated into violent encounters between Israeli forces and Palestinians, and ultimately leading to another war on Gaza. Within this context, Palestinian youth in mixed cities and other Israeli localities took to the streets to express their solidarity with Palestinians in Jerusalem and Gaza. A few days following the uprisings in Sheikh Jarrah, my 15-year-old daughter called me. The school principal, a Palestinian citizen of Israel, was not allowing her and the other school kids to enter school because they were wearing black and covering their shoulders with the Palestinian kafiyah, also in an act of solidarity. Go home or call your parents to bring your uniform, the principal said. Their wardrobe was immediately identified as a defiant act. It might seem odd that a Palestinian school principal in Israel would be so alarmed at the sight of Palestinian solidarity, but the incident encapsulates the paradoxes of Palestinian life in Israel. Around that same time, I was engaged with colleagues in a research in which we theorized the notion of colonized education. Our understanding of colonized education is based on many observations. For one, the segregated schooling systems that Israel has maintained and administered since its establishment, one for the Jewish Hebrew-speaking majority, albeit divided into secular and religious, and one for the Palestinian Arabic-speaking minority. This arrangement might be interpreted as accommodating sociocultural differences, but it actually serves to uphold the divides that privilege the Jewish majority. Within the educational system, the Palestinian national cultural identity has always been perceived as a threat to the Jewish nature of Israel. This is why the Israeli education system serves a dual role as a nationalizing apparatus for Jews and as a denationalizing apparatus for Palestinians. It does so by promoting the Zionist narrative within the Jewish schools and by erasing the Palestinian narrative within the Arab schools. To ensure denationalization, a system of fear was instilled within the Palestinian localities through a sophisticated system of surveillance. Direct surveillance prevailed during the military rule that Israel imposed on the Palestinian community between 1948 and 1966, which restricted their movement, their political organization, and access to means of livelihood. However, a non-direct of control still remains in the form of what Judith Butler would term implicit censorship. Implicit censorship refers to those operations of power that rule out in unspoken ways what will remain unspeakable. Research show how the educational apparatus acts as a limit of what Palestinian youth can express about their identity and experiences. In 2009, for example, the Ministry of Education decided to remove and to ban the use of the concept of an-Nakba, the Arabic for catastrophe, from all Arab schools' curriculum and textbooks. So imposing a standardized official narrative on education systems is particularly common in colonial realities and legacies. The aspiration of colonial projects is mainly to deny their potential expressions of identity. So colonized education is then an analytical tool for, on the one hand, establishing a general understanding of politico-educational contexts that institutionally censor and constrain the sphere of the sayable, and in Israel for capturing how the Israeli Institute has designed Arab education to denationalize and particularly to de-Palestinize Arab students. So to show solidarity with the plight of Palestinians is to defy the main tenet of the Israeli education system. In this sense, the school principal in my daughter's story was right. The symbolic gesture of my daughter and her schoolmates really was an act of resistance. To demonstrate how colonized education operates, I bring an example reported in a previous study from a class for teaching English to 11th graders, where the teacher, who is also Palestinian, attempted to introduce the topic of revolution in school and made use of the Arabic word thawra for revolution. Evidently, the use of the word revolution, thawra, flared up in the students the political sense of revolution vis-a-vis their Palestinian identity and also history. So if we look at these excerpts from the classroom discussion, we see that in lines 11 and 15, the student shouting in Arabic, Palestine, Palestine, and then the teacher in line 37 starting to kind of police or silence the students' engagement with the political topic of Palestine, asking them first, let's not think, and then managing to continue her utterance in line 49 by asking them, let's not think about politics. Not that the teacher doesn't ask them, let's not talk about politics, but let's not think about politics. Regardless of the teacher's attempts to depoliticize and to silence the students keep ignoring her request and keep shouting out Palestine until the teacher on line 58 silences them in Arabic, mish siyasi, meaning not political. So regardless of the students' continuous attempts to speak up as Palestinians, our data analysis showed that the teachers who are subjugated by the colonial rule tend to consistently work towards depoliticizing classroom discussions and silencing nationalist voices, as in the case of students articulating the most unspeakable word, Palestine. So in this sense, colonized teachers become agents of surveillance, enacting policing and silencing practices that are needed to maintain the denationalization of the Palestinian students. To link this incident to my daughter's story, she and the other students insisted, and the principal eventually allowed them to enter school with their black shirts and keffiyehs. But that was as far as the school staff was ready to go. When students initiated a discussion of the events unfolding in Jerusalem and Gaza, the principal and the teachers adamantly refused. This is an educational institution. We are not allowed to discuss political matters, was their response. Notwithstanding the personal load that has been accompanying me as a parent since then, and on the basis of what I have been observing inside Arab classrooms and schools, the incident has provoked in me a scholarly question. How are Palestinian youth in Israel, who are subjected to a colonized educational regime, transforming and resisting denationalizing forces and becoming speaking agents? To address this question, I examine the way Palestinian political ideals cultivated outside the framework of the formal educational system have opened up new possibilities for political organization and expression. I argue that Palestinian youth enact Sumud, Arabic for steadfastness, as a form or as a practice of linguistic citizenship for crafting new subjectivities of political speakerhood different than those imposed on them by the Israeli educational system. While Sumud has been established as a key concept in intellectual and scholarly debates about the strategies Palestinians develop under colonial conditions, Stroud's notion of linguistic citizenship refers to cases when speakers exercise agency and participation to craft new emergent subjectivities of political speakerhood, often outside of those prescribed or legitimated in institutional frameworks of the state, example, schools. Linguistic citizenship offers us an understanding of acts of citizenship in educational contexts as not necessarily related to nation-state citizenship or the yielding of a passport, for example, but rather to practices whereby new actors seeking recognition in the public space in order to determine a new course of events, shift the location of agency and voice. Linguistic citizenship seeks to shift the analytical gear from affirmative to transformative strategies a la Nancy Fraser. So by conceptualizing Sumud as a localized application of linguistic citizenship, I intend to extend the notion of linguistic citizenship beyond its South African origins and offer a semiotic approach for understanding how Palestinian youth in Israel have been acting with Sumud in becoming political, vocal, and transformative agents. Linguistic citizenship is concerned with the question of how marginalized speakers in colonized contexts claim autonomous selves and constitute alternative subjectivities different from and often contrasting to the established ones. So the case study that I present today emphasizes what minoritized groups, such as Palestinians in Israel, do with their available linguistic and semiotic resources in the process of decolonizing the self. Other than reflecting on my own experience as a Palestinian parent or researcher, I also draw on conversations that I had with a Palestinian hip-hop artist named or known as Big Sam. Big Sam was born in the US to Palestinian parents, a father from Gaza and a mother from Jaffa. And he spent several years in Qatar before moving to live in Haifa. He lives in Haifa today. And I also share some of the insights that I gained from conversations that I held with members from the Haifa youth movement. It is my contention that Palestinian youth in Israel enact Sumud as linguistic citizenship practice to contest Israel's attempts to erase their Palestinian identity and history as is systematically practiced within the educational apparatus. In so doing, I hope to show how linguistic citizenship offers a particular vantage point from which to understand counter-hegemonic pedagogies that operate outside formal educational frameworks of the state, enabling Palestinians to defy Israel's attempts to erase their narrative and identity. I now turn to some insights that I have gained from talking to Big Sam and to members of the Haifa youth movements. I bring examples from two of the Haifa youth movement's co-founders, Sama, a she, and Adi, a he. Let me first provide a quick glimpse on Haifa. Haifa is Israel's third largest city with a mix of Jewish and Palestinian Arab residents. It is often regarded as the last considerable option for young Palestinians from villages and towns in the Galilee and the Triangle who seek an urban Palestinian lifestyle. This process of urbanization resulted in the growth of the number of Palestinian civic organizations, university graduates, and professionals, leading to the city's accelerated cultural revival, and even to imagining Haifa in Nadim Karkab's terms as the Palestinian cultural capital in Israel. It is no surprise then that aside from Palestinian-owned cafes and bars, world-class music clubs, independent theaters, and publishing houses, hip-hop artists, and a prominent Palestinian youth movement are also based in Haifa. And now I move to present some of the analysis. As mentioned earlier, at the core of colonizing Palestinian education stands the need to grow future generations of Palestinians who are detached from their Palestinian rootedness and dominated by fear of the institution. Interestingly, three main themes came up prominently from the conversations: the unmuting of young Palestinians' linguistic and national voices, the undoing of colonial fear, and reclaiming ownership to Palestinian space. I begin with the first theme, unmuting young Palestinians' linguistic and national voices, with referring to Big Sam's data. Big Sam is a Palestinian hip-hop artist whose protest music has been capturing the attention of many Arabic-speaking listeners, both locally and globally, as manifested by his tremendous popularity and the high number of followers in both Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. As a site of cultural production, hip-hop culture is potentially political and pedagogical, encouraging a critical and dialogical engagement in colonial and oppressive contexts, such as the context of South Africa or the United States. Dialogical engagement in these contexts is pedagogically achieved through the explicit philosophy of each one teach one. Situating himself and his music within this political pedagogical hip-hop culture, Big Sam states: بحاول أحافظ على الايدنتيتي تبعت هيب هوب ارتست عشان الناس تضل متذكرة إنه الإلهام كان من هناك، من بروكلين، من ديترويت، من الأماكن اللي بلش فيها إنه في فئة أو طبقة اللي هي مضطهدة، Black people، من البوليس الحكومي، وين في قمع ومقموع، وهون في نفس الإشي. هذا الموجود، طول ما في قمع رح يكون في هيب هوب. مش رح تسمعي عمر دياب ولا تامر حسني يحكوا عن شو بيصير في فلسطين. الناس اللي بتموت بالقدس والحواجز، مين بده يحكي عنهن؟ إحنا الشعب، وعشان هيك عندي مسؤولية كبيرة. I try to keep the identity of the hip-hop artists so people keep in mind that inspiration came from there, Brooklyn, Detroit, and from places where people, Black people, were persecuted by the police, the government, where there is oppression, oppressor, and oppressed. And here there is the same. This is the situation. As long as there is oppression, there will be hip-hop. You won't hear Omar Diab or Tamer Hosni, who are popular but apolitical Egyptian singers, speaking about what is happening in Palestine. Who will speak about the people dying in Jerusalem or at checkpoints? We are the people, الشعب in Arabic, and this is why I have a big responsibility. Big Sam asserts that his calling as a Palestinian artist is to speak against and contest the oppression of his people here, just as Black artists are doing there in the US, while locating himself as a hip-hop artist within the African-American hip-hop struggle against anti-Black systemic racism, saying inspiration came from there. Big Sam notes the efforts he invests in making his own people aware of the Black struggle. So speaking about what is happening in Palestine is motivated by a sense of responsibility with which Big Sam distinguishes himself from popular artists such as Omar Diab and Tamer Hosni. Moreover, Big Sam is also aware that his hip-hop is pedagogical. قبل يومين كنت عم بحكي مع أمي يلي موجودة بقطر، وبآخر المكالمة نبهتني بقولها أنت إسا زي المدرس يلي فايت على صف فيه طلاب وهن عم بيستنوا شو بدك تحكي لأنك أنت يلي مسؤول عنهن. 2 days ago, I was talking to my mother who is in Qatar. At the end of our conversation, she warned me by saying, "You are now like a teacher who is entering a class full of pupils and they are waiting to see what you want to say because you are responsible for them." Big Sam's citations of his mother's description of his role as a teacher, alongside his perception of her words a warning, reinforce his sense of pedagogical responsibility towards Palestinian youth. He manifests this responsibility tangibly in his lyrics and in the so-called teaching strategies he uses for writing them. أغنية استيطان كتبتها على أيام أحداث الشيخ جراح. حاولت إنه ما أكون كتير دايركت عن القضية. الفكرة من استيطان بتعرفي كيف لما بيكون في ولد صغير وبدوش ياخد دواء فبتحطي له إياها بطريقة عشان تجبريه ياخدها. هيك أنا كنت أعمل. يعني بنحكي حب وغزل وعلاقات، ولكن خصوصي بستعمل بحديثي عن الحب كلمة غزو وحق العودة. إذا ما بعمل هيك الجيل الصغير ما رح يتلقى شو بحكي. I wrote the song استيطان, Arabic for settler colonialism, during the events in Sheikh Jarrah. I tried not to be direct about the qadiyya. Qadiyya is the Arabic term for the Palestinian issue. It is like when a child refuses to take medication and you try indirect ways to make it happen. This is what I do. I mean, I talk of love, passion, and relationships, but deliberately use words like ghazu, Arabic for conquer, and haqq al-awda, Arabic for right of return. If I don't, the younger generation will not be receptive of this content. To ensure that the younger generation will first receive and then also participate in decolonizing processes, Big Sam seems to apply the principles of culturally relevant pedagogies, namely that discussing issues derived from the learner's own lived experiences, for example, love, passion, and relationship, raises their critical consciousness and increases the receptivity of the offered content. In another song entitled Laysa Bayti, Not My Home, Big Sam describes the agony refugee parents experience when losing a child. He reports that this song was inspired by how a Syrian friend of his lost his daughter while trying to flee to Europe during the war. Deeply moved by the agony his friend's wife was feeling, Big Sam wrote Laysa Bayti to raise attention to the refugee crisis in its broader sense, but also to bring Palestinian youth closer to their pan-Arab identity. Repeating the word biddish, which in spoken Arabic means I refuse, Big Sam speaks against the oppressing and silencing of younger generations and calls for the unmuting of their voices.
بديش أكون مربوط بديش يعم سكوت بديش العمر يفوت بلا ما نعطي دافع لجيل يعيش حر واعي مش مكبوت.
Clearly, Big Sam holds himself responsible for educating the younger generation to become free and conscious. His cognizant refusal to be silent and constrained, بديش أكون مربوط, I refuse to be constrained, بديش يعم سكوت, I refuse that silence prevails. Big Sam offers a counter-educational model to those commonly seen within the formal educational systems, namely his pedagogical responsibility to encourage the future generations of Palestinians to become free-speaking agents could be contrasted to the way most Palestinian teachers are contained within the colonial regulations on them in their colonized education, as we have seen in the English classroom. Following the gestures of agency that he performs in lines 1 to 5 in rap rhythm, as we heard in spoken Arabic, Big Sam moves in lines 6 to 11 into modern standard Arabic, Fusha. Here, he sounds more like a Sufi poet, making use of melodic hymns and chants of devotional poetry. Sufism is known to grant ordinary people an entry point to experience a higher state of consciousness and to manage their social and psychological problems. This connection becomes evident in the way Big Sam directly speaks to his oppressors.
يا من سلبتم حريتي يا
the use of modern standard Arabic or Fusha is significant. Biksam explains that the Quran is his source of inspiration when it comes to selecting a rich form of Arabic that reaches as many listeners as possible, and that might, in his words, encourage the use of less Hebrew in the everyday speech of the Arab people who live in Israel, which I think have great implications following the nation-state law and the demotion of Arabic by the nation-state law. Yet Biksam asserts that he speaks, sorry, it's not moving. Yeah. So Biksam asserts that he speaks spiritually, intending to appeal to everyone, regardless of their religious affiliation. Here again, his Sufi influences emerge, enabling him to communicate intensive mystical emotion through the medium of language to his audience, so they experience the affective state which engendered them. Interestingly, the notion of Sumud encompasses an overarching umbrella for the pedagogical mission Biksam commits himself to. Specifically, Biksam offers a nuanced understanding of Sumud pedagogy. Sumud معناه قوة والقدرة على إنه يضل الواحد يصرخ ويحكي. دايماً في قصص حزينة ولكن في حدا بيحزن وبسكت وفي حدا بيحزن وبيصرخ. حتى لو حسيت إنه كل شيء توقف وانتهى لسه بقدر أصرخ وبقدر أحكي وبقدر أبكي وبقدر أعمل كل شيء أنا بدي إياه. فأنا حر. هذا هو الصمود، إنه تكون حر في كل شيء بتحكيه، ومن هون جاي القوة، والصمود هو بقاء. Sumud means power and the ability to keep screaming and speaking up. There are always sad stories, but what makes the difference is that some people remain silent when they are sad, while others scream. Even when you feel that everything has stopped and ended, we are still able to scream, we are still able to speak, we are still able to cry, and we are still able to do whatever we want to do. So I am free. That's all. Sumud is being free in saying whatever you want, because this is the source of power, and this is baqa, Arabic for survival. So mindful of the hardships, the challenges, and the agonies, and even despair, Biksam offers a hopeful pedagogy of Sumud that allows Palestinians to live freely and mainly unsilently. Challenging the politics of silencing entails learning how to become liberated Palestinians through unlearning colonial practices of de-Palestinization, as I show next in the examples from the Haifa youth movement. So the undoing of colonial fear functions as a tool that young Palestinians use to liberate themselves from the shackles of institutional fear. This is achieved, for example, through associating fear with previous generations, not theirs. In this regard, Adi declares, we crossed the barrier of fear. Analysis suggests that the undoing of colonial fear entails precisely learning to unlearn colonial fear. So for example, Sama refers to how back when she was in the 8th grade, now she was in her early 20s when she shared the story, she and her classmates were punished and sent home by the school administration for hanging the poems of Palestine poet laureate Mahmoud Darwish on the corridor walls in their school and for wearing keffiyas in an honor of his death. He states, إنه لما كنا صغار كنا ننزل نعمل مظاهرة على دوار إيميل حبيبي. هاي المرحلة كنا ملاقيين حاجة ناقصة عنا إنه إحنا نلبيها بما إنه المدرسة بتعطيهاش. ومش بس تعلمنا عن مين إحنا كفلسطينيين، كمان تعاقبنا عشان حاولنا نعبر عن هويتنا. بعدين بس كبرنا فهمنا وأنا بعرف شو لازم أعمل. When we were young, we would go to demonstrate in the War Emil Habibi, which is a major Palestinian corner in Haifa named after the late Palestinian writer Emil Habibi, to compensate for what we were not getting from school. Not only did we not get an education about who we are as Palestinians from school, we were also penalized for trying to express our identity. I realize now at an older age, and I now know what I need to do. This excerpt further demonstrates how the more recent acts of solidarity of my daughter and her schoolmates are situated across a long and continuous line of struggle Palestinian youth have been forging against an educational discursive regime that bans their political and national speakerhood. The stories of Sama, my daughter, and other Palestinian school kids capture how the politics of military rule still operate in Arab schools to censor and constrain the sphere of the Palestinian speakable. Against the constraining forces operating inside the formal educational system, however, Palestinian youth seem to be determined to voice alternative knowledges and craft new political subjectivities different than those otherwise erased. So instead of submitting to those oppressive systems of erasure, Sama agentively works on their deconstruction by enacting linguistic citizenship, though in a different way. أنا اليوم جزء من الصراع تبعي هو صراع نسوي. بتخيل هذا نوع وعي جديد وتاني عن إنه الواحد يصارع على استمرارية عيلته ولقمة عيشه. هو كمان جزء لا يتجزأ من الصراع الفلسطيني بالموتو تبع طالعات ووطن حر ونساء حرة، وهو جزء لا يتجزأ من التحرر تبعنا. والصراع الفلسطيني بملي فراغ كبير بحياتي اليومية. Part of my struggle today is also a feminist struggle. I think that this entails a different type of consciousness than struggling to preserve one's family or living. It is an integral part of the larger Palestinian struggle, and it is also the motto of Tal'at, Watan Hur, and Nisa' Hurra, all names of Palestinian feminist movements. Our liberation as women is an integral part of our broader Palestinian struggle, and this struggle occupies a large space in my everyday life. Particularly significant is Sama's spirit of agency and defiance, which is evident in her ability as a young Palestinian woman to balance her struggle for liberation among more than one axis at a time. Stating that her struggle today is not merely a struggle against colonialism, but also against patriarchy, indicates that Sama clearly espouses intersectional resistance to oppression. Pivotal to our understanding of the intersectionality of Palestinian resistance is the role of feminists, but also as the literature informs us of queer Palestinian movements in redefining the terms of Palestinian struggle in recent decades. In short, the multiplicity of voices that currently engage in the discourse of Palestinian struggle, or pluriversality to use Hannah Arendt's words, are becoming the decolonial way for overcoming, in Saad Atshan's words, for overcoming the surveillance and disenfranchisement, both discursive and embodied, that Palestinians face from many directions. Reclaiming ownership to Palestinian space was also identified as a tool, and this is the last theme that I will discuss today, to utilize, that Palestinians utilize to reinforce and fortify their sense of Palestinian identity and belonging. This perspective could be linked to what Jaworski and Thorlo call making space locating self, in referring to those discursive processes through which the construction of space is deeply imbricated with the realization of selfhood. Reclaiming ownership in this sense is achieved through, for example, demystifying the space of so-called coexistence, which is an idea that has long been linked almost synonymously when speaking about Haifa. In this regard, Sama states, إنه أنا اللي فهمته اليوم إنه هاي الفقاعة رجعت فقعت، إنه إحنا مش عايشين بنفس الواقع، يعني إحنا عايشين حد بعض بس الواقع هو مختلف كلياً. What I understand today, following the May events, is that the bubble has exploded. We live side by side physically, but in totally different realities. While Sama situates the explosion of the coexistence bubble within the context of the aftermath of the May events, Haifa's municipal discriminatory policy towards its Palestinian residents has long reflected the hypocrisy behind the title of coexistence. Mostly noticed is the vain municipal attempts to encourage the Judaization of the city as a result of its alarm by the growing Palestinian presence in Haifa. While asserting that the bubble has indeed exploded, Adi brings to the fore a historical dimension for demystifying the idea of coexistence. بفلسطين تاريخياً الناس قاومت كرد فعل مباشر لأشياء بتصير معها، والناس نزلت على الشارع من دون ما حدا يجبر يقنعها. فأغلب الناس عارفة ومقتنعة لأنه التهديد كان عبيتهن والمستوطنين بدهن يفوتوا على بيوتهن. بحيفا الفقاعة هاي فقعت لأنه الناس شافت إيش يعني بيتك يكون مهدد وحارتك تكون مهددة. Historically in Palestine, people resisted as a direct response to things that happened to them and took to the streets without needing to have been convinced or asked by anyone to do so. Most people in Haifa went down to the streets because they knew and were convinced that the settlers were threatening their homes. In Haifa, the bubble exploded because people could now see with their own eyes how their homes and neighborhoods could be taken away from them. Adi situates the explosion of the bubble in May within the larger historic Palestinian struggle, spelled out as historically in Palestine, people resisted. This historic framing highlights the anti-colonial nature of the struggle in Haifa, complicating thus the notion of coexistence whose failings are now signaled by the colonizer-colonized nature of the Jews-Arabs relation in the city. Describing how the Arab residents of Haifa experienced and responded to feelings of fear and threat has a sense of déjà vu. The fear for one's home being taken over by settlers brings to the minds of many Palestinians, including Adi and myself, images of the mass exodus of Haifa's Arab population, which began on April 22, 1948, with crowds of panic-stricken residents leaving their houses. While neither Adi nor myself experienced the Nakba firsthand, these images are remembered and talked about in different fora, precisely so that the younger generations who did not experience the loss their grandparents did, and who do not learn about this part of history in their colonized education, connect with their history as Palestinians. What this excerpt shows is that Adi, who is a third-generation Palestinian, has learned the lesson. Not only that, Adi explains how the Haifa youth movement have been working to pass knowledge to other young Palestinians. عن جد بنتأمل إنه عم نوصل لعدد كبير من الشباب الفلسطيني لأنه مجهود وتعب ونشغل على ملان مشاريع. بفكر المشاركة بتحكي بحد ذاتها. المشاركة اللي كانت على مدار السنين، إذا ناخذ نموذج واحد اللي ضل معنا على طول كل السنين اللي هو ذكرى سقوط حيفا، المشاركة فيه بس بتزيد. يعني بتذكر عملنا جولة تاريخية قبل 2 أو 3 كان فيها أكثر من 200 واحد حتى أجى عليها البوليس. فكروها مسيرة وأخذوا تفاصيلنا. فعملنا جولة لحد وادي الصليب، فهي دلالة على إنه هاي الشباب وعيت أكثر وعم بتفاعلوا معنا كتير. We really hope that we are reaching a large number of Palestinian youth. We don't mind the effort and how tiring this work might sometimes be, because participation in the anniversary of the fall of Haifa over the years exceeded our expectations. Participation continues to rise every year. I remember that 2 or 3 years ago, we organized a historic excursion and there were more than 200 participants. When we arrived at Wadi Salib, a displaced neighborhood in Haifa, the police, while Adi laughing, came and requested that we identify ourselves. Because of the large number of participants, they thought we were marching. Young people are becoming more aware of these issues and therefore wish to interact with us and attend our events. So in contrast to how the colonized education denies Palestinians the right to learn about this part of their history in school, the Haifa youth movement offers counter-hegemonic pedagogical practices which involve on-site activities of narrating and remembering. Note how the representation of space coincides with the surveillance forces, the police, arriving to interrogate and interrupt Adi and his friends. Gathering near Wadi Salib was apparently identified by the police as a defiant act. To conclude, the way young Palestinians contest denationalizing forces could be understood as acts of linguistic citizenship, which engage pluriversality through lifting forth the voices of individuals and groups historically captured in circuits of invisibilization to demand recognition and lay claims to dignity. The interpretation of Sumud as semiotic or meaning-making acts of young Palestinians as they are practiced outside and against the formal and oppressive educational system can be captured through the transformative conception of linguistic citizenship. Linguistic citizenship enables us to draw attention to the way young Palestinians are enacting Sumud while offering alternative voices that can be inserted into educational processes and structures that otherwise alienate. Importantly, Sumud pedagogy offers a new framing of linguistic citizenship as a decolonial pedagogy by drawing attention to the way marginalized groups, including Palestinian youth in Israel, redefine themselves by reclaiming space and learning to unlearn colonial fear. Thank you so much. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bishara. Dr. Mukuni, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. Where do I start? I get you when you are into linguistic citizenship and all that stuff. But I am really struggling to see how linguistic citizenship can get you into explaining some of the radical concepts that you are dealing with. Because I don't see how, for example, linguistic citizenship can enable you to capture issues about feminism, intersectionality, queerness, etc. Because I need to be careful here. Inbuilt into the notion of linguistic citizenship is a very conservative idea about citizenship. Citizenship presupposes that there's a criteria that you apply that may include other people, but exclude others. So citizenship by its very nature cannot be egalitarian, because you have to exclude other people who are part of that. And even if you become a citizen, it doesn't necessarily mean you are a bona fide member of that group. I may be an American citizen, but they don't see me as an American. So that's why I'm not sure. I get you. I like where you're going, but I need to be convinced that linguistic citizenship takes you there. No, that's the first, my first. Let's engage in that, and then we can what? Then we can talk through other concepts. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, I get you. I get what you're trying to do, but whether this concept, this particular one, gets you where you're trying to go, one, or two, whether it is in actual fact necessary for you to evoke that concept in order to get where you want to go, is another issue altogether.
Okay, thank you so much for this. I think that this is a valuable comment, and I have to admit that I have been engaging with this for a long time. And let me start by saying that my first engagement with linguistic citizenship was that it started as a critique of the linguistic human rights framework.
Yes, yes.
In a sense that it kind of critiques the discourse of rights. And that, I think it kind of works when talking about Palestinians in Israel and the whole issue of the second-class citizenship of Palestinians in Israel, and the fact that Palestinians in Israel are discriminated by more than 68 laws. So it seems that the fight for equal rights or the fight for equity cannot be really achieved by forging a discourse of rights. So I think that So this was the first kind of connection that I had with linguistic citizenship, that as a concept or as a theory, it was first introduced in critique of right frameworks.
Yes, yes.
So this is one. And I think that the second thing is that its emphasis or the focus of linguistic citizenship on what happens in the margins. So I think that, in the margins, and when I talk about margins, I talk about not only the margins of, in this case, the Israeli society, but also maybe the margins of the Palestinian society itself. So in the sense, it gives me a kind of the framework or the tools to look at what these speakers or what these subjects, agents who are on the margins of society, what they are doing with the semiotic linguistic resources that they have in order to claim autonomous selves, or in order to claim subjectivities, to construct subjectivities that are otherwise erased, not necessarily by the colonial institute, but also by people from their own community, as we have seen in the case of colonized education, where teachers, Palestinian teachers themselves, become what Edge would call the imperial troopers. Okay, yes, so in the sense that what I'm trying to say is that the Palestinian community itself is a heterogeneous community, And so in the sense, linguistic citizenship also enables me as a scholar, as a researcher, to look at what's happening in general in the Palestinian community, but also at the margins of the community. And I think that the focus also of linguistic citizenship on pluriversality, or the multiplicity of voices, also enables me to look at these different kind of axis of struggle that we have, that we have been witnessing. So it's not only the Palestinian struggle today is not only a struggle against colonialism, but it's also against patriarchy, but it's also against internal crime. That I opened my talk today with paying tribute to the number of Palestinians who have been murdered due to criminal shootings, reaching the horrible or the frightening number of almost 100 murders since the beginning of the year. So I think that all of these forms of struggle also requires that we look for theories, or we look for kind of analytical and theoretical tools that will enable us to look at the pluriversality and multiplicity of voices that are being heard in Palestinian community.
Yes, that part I get it. But you don't get there by using institutionally legitimated meta language like citizenship, right? What you are interested in is what is happening in the periphery, but you don't want to look at the periphery through an institutional gaze, the gaze that is adopted by governments, by authoritative regimes, for example. And that is what citizenship does. But I don't think people who live on the margins of society really talk about citizenship. They may talk about survival, they may talk about adaptation and all that, but they don't frame themselves as either citizens of this or linguistic citizenship. Anyway, let me leave that aside. Because that's a story that you and me can continue talking about. I want to focus on what I think is a more productive issue, not my own concerns with linguistic citizenship. In the Palestinian context, are there any nuanced differences in terms of political science that you draw between anti-colonial resistance and struggle? Or are these categories used more or less interchangeably? I don't know the scholarship very much, but I'm trying to work out in my own mind when for example, we talk about a struggle, certain ideas were conjured up in my own mind. When you talk about resistance, certain ideas came into my mind, and anti-colonial issues and struggle. So I'm trying to work out whether it's possible to come up with a matrix that enables you to establish nuanced differences between all these various terms that we're using, or they are used more or less interchangeably.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that this is this is a very important question, and it kind of gives me also maybe triggers me to dig more into the use of these terms. But I think that in recent years, we have been hearing more of not only anti-colonial, but also decolonial. Maybe when we talk about the Palestinian struggle, we talk about decolonial in the sense that many Palestinian scholars recently have been more and more aware that Israel is a settler colonial polity. And therefore, so in the sense that all of the institutional policies, whether educational, judiciary, also recently there has been an article published how also the medical the public health in Israel is also kind of a settler colonial technology of the state. So I think that in all realms, the Palestinian struggle today has taken a decolonial form in the sense of trying to do all of these things together. Also to struggle, okay, on a daily basis on how to kind of navigate one's identity and one's language in a country that is that sees Palestinians as the other on the one hand, and also sees our language, being speakers of Arabic also, as others. I have been also engaging lately with the idea that it's because of the language that we speak, we are kind of racialized in the sense that because we speak Arabic, then we are treated as the racialized others because we speak Arabic. So, for example, we have also seen in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, a few weeks ago, attacks on Palestinian members of the Knesset for using Arabic on the Knesset, and kind of using the nation state law as a kind of support for attacking these Knesset members, these Palestinian Knesset members, for their use of Arabic. So I think that it's kind of, if we look at, it's also a struggle on a daily basis, to struggle in the workplace, to struggle in the market, to struggle in the way you conduct your life as a parent, as a worker, as a doctor, as a university professor. So it's a struggle, but it's also kind of resistance that you not only you struggle to live, okay, these challenges on a daily matter, but you need also to make the choice or make the decision whether you are contained, okay, whether you will be contained with these colonial forces, or whether you will kind of form a resistance strategy, whether you will speak up against it, whether you will kind of engage in activists movements against it. So I think that they are all interrelated. They are not, we cannot say that they are interchangeable, but they are interrelated.
Okay.
They are more entangled in the sense I feel that, I take it on myself. So it's more of being entangled with these struggle, resistance, and kind of trying to cope with how to decolonize ourselves as Palestinians.
Then let me continue with this and ask a quasi-personal question. You were referring to your daughter and some of your experiences. From your perspective as a parent, as a mom, what did you learn about the art of resistance from your interaction with your kid? How does Israel look like when you listen to your kid? What do you learn about yourself? For example, let's say me, what I learn about the United States from listening to my son is a very disappointing world. But it's interesting, I'm interested in getting a sense from you. What do you learn about yourself and the context that you are in from your exchanges with your daughter?
Well, thank you so much. Well, first of all, you bring me now to kind of illustrate how this is actually how it all started. Engaged the idea of pedagogy of Sumud, starting from that Tuesday morning when I received this phone call from my daughter, telling me that that she was banned from entering school because she was trying to express her solidarity with Palestinians in Jerusalem and Gaza. So and the lesson that I learned, and I guess and I want to share kind of since you asked me a personal question, I will also answer in a personal manner. When Chanel sent me the consent form to ask me whether I agree for the session to be recorded, I hesitated for 2 days. And then I said that, well, if we're talking about learning to unlearn colonial
Yes,
fear,
yeah.
is the lesson that I learned, first of all, from my daughter and from these Palestinian youth who are taking into the streets and who are marching in May every year, in May 15 during the Nakba commemoration. So these, I think that these younger generations are teaching us a lesson that maybe it's time to undo colonial fear. So I think that it is, but because I started talking to her, okay, and talking to other, Palestinian youth, when I realized that there is a lesson to learn from them. So this is one part of my answer. Part is fear. Which is something that I cannot kind of, conceal. It is the fear of a Palestinian parent for the future of our children here, and what future awaits them, what opportunities awaits them, how will they be treated always and forever as the other in a country, okay, that kind of legally and lawfully now depicts them and constructs them as second-class citizenship. Today I was reading also with the whole, rise of crime. They were using the term in Hebrew. It's called Ezrah Sug Met. It's class, like it's the literal translation is a dead type citizen. In the sense of playing with the words from Hebrew, bet and met, bet type B citizen. So what I'm saying is that this personal engagement with the research, I think that this is part of me being a Southern scholar engaged with decolonizing research methods, that we start from the personal. I started from what happens with me as a mother, as a parent, who is engaged and who is kind of subjected to these matrices of fear. Yes. It was the question that, the first time that I started to kind of cope with this question is when I wanted to present this work initially 2 years ago in AAAL conference in Pittsburgh. So it was, and I admit that it was part of me also kind of decolonizing these colonial forces that, just like Big Sam said, this is pedagogy of Sumud. We need to speak up. So it might be risky. I'm not saying that it's not risky. It might have kind of consequences, but and I think it relates also to the question that you asked before, that where can we draw the line between struggle and resistance and anti-colonialism? And I think it's part of it. This is how it is interrelated, because these are the issues that we deal with on a daily basis. On when do we speak up? To how do we protect our families? How do we protect our jobs? I'm a professor at an Israeli university. How do I make sure that I kind of speak in a way that will not jeopardize my job? So I think that all of these are part of the pedagogy of Sumud that I'm trying to theorize now, in the sense that pedagogy of Sumud enables or grants minoritized or marginalized people a kind of, a framework of voice where people can at least speak up against these colonial forces and against these settler colonial policies.
Good. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Let me hand over to Phoebe in case there's somebody who wants to jump in.
Thank you, Dr. McConey.
There's Lynn Mario, I think, wants to jump in.
Yes. Before that, we have a comment. Rana is thanking you for speaking on their behalf, and there are a couple of people who are agreeing with it. So Lynn Mario, you can go.
Thank you, Muzna, for that wonderful presentation. Connecting to what Sinfri just said, as you may know, I'm Yemeni by origin, and so I identify with what you presented and the whole problematic and the concept of resistance. But also coming back to what Sinfri said on citizenship, I think when we speak of resistance, and I see this in my work in linguistics, the Southern view of linguistics, challenging the concept of language as a bounded, singular, normative kind of thing. In politics, very often, I see parallels in politics, and especially in our concept of the nation, which is let's say, it's a very colonial concept as well. The concept of the nation was literally exported from Europe, from Western Europe elsewhere, right? And the concept of nation, like the concept of language, comes with the idea of homogeneity, singularity, and it connects with the concept of democracy, which, when connected to the nation, the concept of democracy also tries to protect the nation, which comes before democracy, as homogeneous and singular. And so the concept of democracy is always understood in paradigms of nations as being whatever pertains to the majority, right? And so the minorities are silenced. In national democracies, the minorities are silenced. Linguistically, whatever, culturally, whatever, right? And so when we speak of resistance within a paradigm of the nation, and they're connecting with Sinfri's comments on linguistic citizenship, just a small comment. I think South Africa is a very complicated case, and I wouldn't like to go into that. But if we speak of resistance without challenging these paradigms which are in place already, like the nation and democracy, meaning the majority, we are going to be we'll be speaking to ourselves as minorities, as silenced minorities, right? Because we're not challenging exactly the presupposed concepts which are being used to silence us, right? So it's like saying a little bit like we are complaining by of not being given a voice, but we're complaining in sign language. They're not listening. Right? And I'll give you the example of what happened to us in the Yemen, right? Where, as you know, the nation is not something within historically which applies to us in the Middle East, in the Arab world, right? So in the Yemen, we fought against. I'm from the South Yemen. In the Yemen, we fought against British colonialism. We expelled the British, and then we were taken over by the northern Yemenis, right? And so now we are supposedly a nation, but in the south of the Yemen, we are oppressed by North Yemen. We are silenced by North Yemen, and we are oppressed by North Yemen. Now, how can we resist? We can't resist in the Yemen because we are considered to be a minority against the majority, and North Yemen in numerical terms is much, much larger than the South Yemen. So what we are facing exactly is, we've in the Yemen, we fought against colonialism, and now colonialism is hitting us in terms of the paradigm of the nation, right? And we are stuck. We are stuck for words. We cannot even resist. So it's a concept. I mean, before Europe, Yemen was a place of nation states from the European perspective, right? So cities, we had independent walled cities. So it's a totally different paradigm. So now what I'm working on from a Southern perspective, and this is something where I'd like to dialogue with you more, is a different concept. Looking at resistance. Firstly, I was surprised how you speak of resistance and fear, but not of violence, because there is no fear without violence, right? And so
maybe not today, but it's
no, and I think when we speak of violence, that will bring us back to memories of Fanon and how our resistance has to be much more radical than using the language of the dominant. Or we could use the language of the dominant against them. right? So, I mean, that's where the radical needs to come in when we speak of violence. So it's not just something discursive, it's bodily. There's suffering, there's bodily suffering, right? You mentioned your talk was based within the state of Israel, but the suffering across the border in Palestine, which is not really a border, right? Because they don't recognize the existence of Palestine as an independent entity. So all of these complexities, I think the strategy is not to, the strategy of resistance is not to say we are speaking back in Foucaultian terms, but it's to challenge the unmarkedness, right? So you use the term racialization. Yeah, racialization marks otherness. Now what we have to do is challenge the unmarkedness. Now whatever passes for unmarked, the normative, the language, the nation, all of these are supposedly unmarked, but Israel imported the model of the nation from Europe. So how can we resist that importation? If we are fighting against coloniality, we have to fight also against the nation, the notion of the nation. And so it's so complex. And I think, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of the French political philosopher Jacques Rancière, who gives us some kind of points in some directions which are not standard. So basically, I'm going to end here, but basically what Rancière says is we, the margins who are the uncounted, right? So we challenge the counting. And when we challenge the counting, which doesn't count us in as part of what the hegemony, right? So we're not challenging the counting by saying that we want to be counted. No, we are challenging the counting. We are challenging those who claim to be the counters, right? So it's not a question of we want to be included. It's a question of we are challenging the paradigm that excludes us. We don't want to be included in your paradigm, right? Because you will always treat us, you will always racialize us. So we want to challenge the paradigm that has excluded us. So we challenge the counting, the counters, and not the fact that we are not counted.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think that this is, first of all, I would really appreciate it if you share with me the work of the French scholar. I would really love to read his work. I just, while you were mentioning the last piece of comment, I remembered that in one of the other excerpts that I did not present today, one of the Haifa youth movements said something very interesting, and that kind of answers what you kind of raised. First of all, I don't think that the resistance that I was referring to is it's the request is to be included in the nation state. And this is very important to make it clear, okay? So Palestinians are not, okay, asking to be assimilated or integrated within the Jewish nation state. This has never been part of the political Palestinian struggle. This is one. And what I'm talking about when I use the term citizenship, and I talk about acts of citizenship in the sense, and this is not the nation state citizenship, but we talk about acts of citizenship in a kind of performativity notion, in the sense of how these people, okay, who are marked, okay, as others, how they go about the decolonizing of these subjectivities that are imposed on them because they are marked. So it is not in the sense that they want kind of a Jewish citizenship. This is not what's going on here. And so that brings me to what Adi said in a different excerpt. He told me something that I always remember. He said, well, let's begin by understanding that we are not a minority. So in the sense that, okay, he says that we need to understand that even our position, and this is true because the status of minority was imposed on the Palestinian community as a result of establishing of Israel as a nation state. So it's a result of colonialism, of settler colonialism. So it is not something, okay, that Palestinians kind of, you know, they did not immigrate to Israel. They did not become, okay, the kind of the minority in a country that they immigrated to. So these are the homeland indigenous minority. And you see that the younger generations, or at least those that, you know, are now active in university campuses or in these youth movements, or who are kind of taking part in the Nakba commemoration every year, they are very cognizant about the fact that they do not see themselves as a minority, but rather they see themselves as part of a continuum of this Palestinian people from the river to the sea. So it's the sense that, you know, so the request or the kind of the core of the struggle is not a struggle to being included within the Jewish nation state, but it is a kind of a colonizing their kind of the attempt of Israel as a settler colonial polity to erase them, okay, as an indigenous and as a homeland minority. So this is very important. And for those people who maybe missed, okay, or who are not familiar with the concept of linguistic citizenship, again, it's the focus of citizenship. Maybe I agree with you that citizenship as a term, it's like, you know, part of the liberal democratic West, and it's kind of a term that was invented in the global North. But the use of the citizenship in linguistic citizenship refers more to practices or to the way that these marginalized, at least the way I understand it. I may be missing something, okay, but the way that I look at citizenship is it's a citizenship that kind of gives a framework of voice and enables marginalized groups to kind of to construct their subjectivities and their political subjectivities and kind of forms of expression in a way that is different than the way the colonial polity has enforced on them for so long. So I hope that I made this clear.
Thank you, Dr. Bishara. Thank you, Lynn Mario. Ashraf, you have the floor. Ashraf, your hand is raised. I guess not. So we have Michael Scott has a comment.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the screen.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You can go. You can go now.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Muzna, for the useful presentation. I need to agree with Lynn and Simfri, Lynn Mario and Simfri, that the concept of citizenship is really unhelpful in the way it was theorized. For example, the quotations which you displayed from Stroud, the first one, for example, is about crafting new emergent subjectivities of political speakerhood outside of those prescribed by institutional frameworks of the state. You do not have state. Let's agree on this. You lack a state. That's the key point. You are fighting, you're struggling, and we the people outside Palestine also are supporting the Palestinian people. They don't have state. Yeah, there's some kind of recognition by the United States, by the UN, you know, that you have some kind of state, but you know, Muzna, that's not a real state. So in that sense, it's misleading, I think. The second also extract, which you took from Stroud, says practice whereby new actors seek recognition in the public space. Seeking recognition from whom? From the Zionist? You see, you're there not to seek recognition. You're there to seek your state, seek redistribution, seek something more than just recognition, not recognition even from the. So in that sense, I think it's unhelpful, Muzna. I can't see it helpful. Besides, I know the focus of your presentation is on the Palestinian citizens. I'm using the word citizens in the former state, because then they are talking about the citizens who are living in Israel, not all Palestinians, am I right? But again, the word citizenship here, that's the problem. Those Palestinians who are living outside or living in Gaza, for example, or other areas, I don't think they can reconcile with this word, citizenship. That's how I feel. I need to raise a question. It's a general question. It's not necessarily to you, Muzna. It's for Lynn, Mario, and Cynthia and others. These guys, these people, the Palestinians they do not have a state. Now we are saying to these guys, well, the idea of the state is a very oppressive idea, but they don't have it. You see my point, Lynn, Mario? They don't have it. They're fighting to have that even evil version, but they don't have it at all. And in that sense, I think we are just imposing, I feel sometimes they're posing a kind of framework, or looking at the Palestinian context from perspective, which presupposes that they have state. That I think the Palestinians in Israel, in the whole land, are the majority. They're the silenced majority. They're not a minority, but they're the silenced majority. So I don't know how to you see the point, Di Mario. Yeah, we all agree that the idea of the nation state is a colonial idea, it's oppressive and so on. But these guys, if you are going to say, you say this to a Palestinian who, literally speaking, when he leaves his home or her home, she might be, subject to any act of killing, literal killing, as she cited the cases. So how are we gonna sell this? The idea of the idea that the nation state is a colonial construction. The Muzna, one of the points about the concept of linguistic citizenship is that it treats language as as a messy, fluid, and so on, and something uncountable as a practice, and so on. But to what extent this critical conception of language, to what extent can it help in the struggle? Because in that struggle, the definition of language depends on the context in which I need it, and which the people need it, at least at ideological level. I'm not talking about the practical, practice-oriented level. At the ideological level, don't you think we need that unitary, let me use Vac's centralizing strategy. Don't you think we need that unitary understanding of language, of Arabic as one unit? Because it's part of the struggle. You see the point? If you say to the Zionist, well, language doesn't exist, but that's a mark of your identity. You see the point? Thank you. I need to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I need to respond. First of all, I think that we need to really make the distinction between Palestinians who live inside Israel and Palestinians who live under occupation in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And I think that it's, and I apologize, but I think that it's repeatedly unfair, okay? The kind of accusations that are made against the Palestinians in Israel and against the form of struggle, because I think that it kind, you know, and with all, you know, the respect, but, you know, if people are sitting in their well-based American campuses outside of this conflict, okay, they can easily kind of, you know, draw criticism on the way that Palestinians in Israel are kind of forging their resistance, okay, against the colonial forces that kind of dominate their lives. So I think that in order to be able to judge or to understand the complexity, and this is what I said, okay, from the beginning, that the incident that I presented here and the kind of the data that I presented here, they only kind of give a glimpse on the complexity of being a Palestinian, or on the complexity of Palestinian life in Israel. So we need to take, okay, to look at the complexity of the judiciary system. We need to look at how the education system operates, and this is only a glimpse of how this educational system operates. We need also to look at how higher education works. We need to look at the linguistic challenge, where Palestinians speak. And you are right, Ashraf. I think that, you know, I have written a kind, not against kind of the celebratory approaches of translanguaging, in the sense of, you know, celebrating that language is fluid and language is dynamic, and that sometimes, okay, we need to look at these colonized contexts and look at the way different languages interact with each other, So I think that to Palestinians, the Palestinians who live as citizens, okay, in Israel, okay, and by the way, the citizenship itself was also imposed on them. It was something, okay, so it's a long history, and I think that, you know, the scope of this meeting is beyond going into the details of how Palestinians gained, okay, this kind of how the complexity of their life. But I really recommend the work of Lana Tatur, okay, on citizenship, okay, on citizenship as a colonial polity, okay. It was published in 2019 following the nation state law, and I think that I can send it afterwards to the forum. I think that the work of Tatur, she's based, I think, in the University of Sydney. She discusses, okay, the complexity of the citizenship, okay, the so-called citizenship framework of Palestinians in Israel. So I think that we need to understand the long historical and political kind of development of Palestinian life in Israel throughout the whole years, before we say that it's like, you know, okay, so we will now go into discussions of state, what is not state. I started, okay, by framing the education of Palestinians, okay, the educational within what I kind of me and my colleagues termed as colonized education. So it is within this colonized education, okay, which is run by the state, that I kind of theorized, okay, pedagogy of Sumud as linguistic citizenship. So again, the notion of citizenship is not the nation state. It's not the notion of the nation state citizenship. It is acts of citizenship in the sense of performativity, in terms of agency, in terms of what people do with language and with other semiotic resources in order to be recognized by, first of all, by themselves. It is not to be recognized by the so-called state. So we're talking about processes of erasure, as I presented in the examples. These students, Palestinian students, are not given, okay, the curriculum, the official state curriculum, okay, does not allow them to learn about Palestinian history. There is also the language itself is becoming more and more of a challenge that kind of stands in their way to tertiary education. This is why we see a lot of Palestinians choosing to study abroad, because of the language barrier, because Hebrew is becoming a difficult language. English is becoming a barrier. So a lot of Palestinians are also, choosing to study abroad, okay, in neighboring countries, in Jordan, or also in universities in the West Bank, or in other universities. So we see that the challenges are on a daily basis on many kind of, and these are kind of complex challenges in terms of language, in terms of culture, in terms of politics, and in terms also of nationalism. So I really wanted to make clear, okay, that when we talk about, and this is why I began my talk today with saying that, the concept of Sumud, the term of Sumud itself applies to many Palestinian contexts. And this is why it is important, okay? It was really important for me to begin by defining that when we talk about the Sumud practices of Palestinians in Israel, we need to take into consideration the complex circumstances, the complexity of the conditions, okay, of being Palestinians in Israel. And I think that also sharing some of the personal examples from myself as a Palestinian parent, researcher, university professor, all of these things, and with being kind of to navigate all of these matrices of fear and matrices of domination. All of these, kind of constitute part of the complexity of being a Palestinian in Israel. So I hope that I made this clear. And with, the citizenship, we'll continue the dialogue. This is what's beautiful about these, about our academic, community. We can argue with each other on the use of different theoretical terms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bishara. There are a few more comments. Michael Scott thanks you for your thought-provoking presentation. And he talked about parallels that he sees between Big Sam in Haifa and other artists in Gaza and the West Bank. He names them. In terms of the diaspora and major upcoming events where such cultural and educational expressions of resistance and Sumud is relevant, he puts a website where PalestinianRights.org, he suggested. So that's his comment. Dorothy, who's not here, but has a comment and question, says, the presentation and reactions from Professor Makoni and D'Souza reminds me strongly of Gayatri Spivak's famous Can the Subaltern Speak essay, subjectivity, othering, and socialites of resistance that emerged due to colonization. Any attempts to homogenize language of citizenship, acquiring markers to belong to the dominant, etc., further strengthens the oppressor. And this is her question. Can theorizing decolonialism and resistance produce multiple complex intersectional identities, socialites, rather than annexing such acts part of the dominant ideologies? That is not very clear, but she's not here to answer it. But can you speak to the concept of how subjectivity and resistance, we're trying to do good, but sometimes it can end up not being what it is that we're trying to do.
Well, I think that I'm trying to think of the question, okay, because it's actually what I have concluded with, in the sense that it's part of decolonizing the self, and I think that I put myself as a researcher on the service of the kind of in the service of the field, in the sense that I kind of put myself, my daughter, my community, in order to kind of decolonize research methods and say that this is how we suggest doing things. So I think if we look at intersectionality and the intersectionality of Palestinian resistance, I think that yes, there is a room for this multiplicity of voices in decolonizing, and it's not supposed to homogenize. Okay, it's exactly the opposite. It's the pluriversality of voices, the multiplicity of voices indicates that we are nothing, okay, but heterogeneous. It's not. It's diverse. And I think that I said that before, that we need to kind of look at the Palestinian community and the Palestinian people as a heterogeneous, multiple kind of ongoing, changing, dynamic community with its different voices, with its different, there's no consensus on what is Palestinian struggle. So this is like, you know, it's clear to everyone. To relate to Spivak's Can the Subaltern Talk? I wrote an essay, okay, and I called it. It's on how English teachers who work in Jewish schools, kind of how they speak against the hegemonic language policy that they face on the one hand, and also being othered in the other system. There is this kind of phenomena in the last decade or so where, because of shortage in the Hebrew-speaking system, okay, so they are hiring more Palestinian teachers to teach in Jewish Hebrew-speaking schools. So, and I termed the article, "The Subaltern Speaks Back." So I think that, yes, okay. I think that my presentation today and my work on pedagogy of Sumud is all about, you know, the subaltern speaking back. And I guess that I'm now I'm struggling with the question that Kumara Vadivelo asked before me. We know that the subaltern can speak. We know that the subaltern can write and can do research. The question is, can the subaltern act? So I think that this is the main concern now, that we know how to speak, okay, we know how to express ourselves, but the main question now, can the marginalized act? And I think that this is not an easy question. And, you know, going back to problematizing linguistic citizenship, I think that Oostendorp also, you know, when she problematized the utopic notion of linguistic citizenship by you know, arguing that it's both utopic and dystopic at the same time. So I think that, you know, and this is part of how I see the engagement with Sumud as linguistic citizenship, that it is both utopic and dystopic. It's in the sense it might provide a framework of voice, but it can be also, you know, provide a framework for imprisonment or framework of, you know, destruction at the end. So speaking up, we all know that speaking up has its own, you know, consequences, and it's not without its prices. So therefore, I'm kind of trying to engage with all of these terms. And hopefully the article is currently under review. So if it's published, okay, then we can think about you know, the what we can do afterwards. And if not, okay, and if it's sent for revision, maybe I can also, you know,
share it with us.
Anyway, but cross your fingers that it will be.
We'll be looking forward to it. We have a last question in the comments from Ingrid. Ingrid says, "Thank you so much for the presentation, Muzna. I have a question about coalition building across historic Palestine. Do you find that any of the processes you described are different when young Palestinians who are citizens of Israel organize and act with those who are not, including in Gaza to the extent that this is possible, given, example, differences of educational systems, government, movement, access rights, the role of Hebrew exercise, etc. I suppose organizing with Jerusalemites in Sheikh Jarrah involves some of these dynamics."
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm just reading the question again. Well, I think that
I could explain the question if it's not.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
It's so good to see you since you are here. So maybe
Nice to see. Yeah, you know, I'm just thinking of the discourses of Palestinian identity being different in some ways based on which regime young Palestinians are living under. I think part of what I find very interesting about your work is the the insight you provide into young people who've maybe been told that they're Arabs and not Palestinians, if that's one way to put it. Whereas in my experience, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are very much brought up. They are very much told that they're Palestinians all along. And so, of course, they have their educational systems have different challenges. And so I'm just curious, to the extent this is something you have insight into, what are the conversations like when the young people who your presentation focused on are coalition building with those who've grown up with some different discourses, different restrictions, obviously. Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to ask about.
Yeah, well, first of all, I need to kind of re-emphasize one thing, is that when me and my colleagues, Hadar Netz and Sumud, when we theorized the notion of colonized education, it was because we sensed that there is an attempt to de-Palestinize. It's exactly, this is one of them, and this is what we said, okay, that one of the main goals of the Israeli Institute, okay, since the establishment of Israel, was kind of preventing the Palestinian community from growing nationalist, fertile nationalist grounds, if we might say, in the sense that they knew that if the Palestinian community will develop, will nourish, okay, its national sense, that it will become a threat, okay, to Israel's Jewish nature. And this is I also mentioned this in my presentation, that since the beginning, okay, Israel perceived the Palestinian national identity as a threat, and therefore the educational system was constructed, was built in a way, okay, that it will denationalize, but also to de-Palestinize. And by the way, during the military rule, okay, that I mentioned, okay, until 1966, there were agents, okay, of the, agents of surveillance, okay, state agents of surveillance. They called in Hebrew Shabak, okay, so the agents of the Shabak, okay, who were implanted inside Arab schools, okay, Palestinian schools, okay, so, and their job was to monitor and to make sure, okay, that, political discussions are not being held inside the schools, okay. They would also control even the hiring, okay, of teachers. So they will be responsible for the hiring of teachers. And therefore, during the 50s, for example, a lot of Palestinian teachers were imprisoned, okay, because of their political expression and because also of their activism outside of school. So we have seen that, in terms of why, okay, Palestinians in Israel refer to themselves, whether they refer to themselves as Palestinians or whether they refer to themselves as Arabs, okay, or whether they refer to themselves as Israel, okay, kind of depicts them as Israeli Arabs, okay, or the Arabs of Israel. It's a matter of, I think, the level of consciousness, and it's a matter of exactly what I have been talking about. It's a matter of to what extent, okay, the young Palestinians are exposed to the education that is happening outside the formal educational system on the one hand, and also to what extent, okay, you are lucky enough to have a teacher who is critical enough or who is conscious enough to make, kind of to use the so-called democratic sphere, okay, that Israel kind of presents, okay, itself as being a democratic country, okay, to what extent there are critical or critical pedagogues, we can call them, okay, if I might use Paulo Freire's terms, okay, to what extent do we have those critical pedagogues who will be willing to kind of take, okay, the initiative and open the space for their students to think critically about who they are, to connect them with their history, with their identity, with their rootedness as Palestinians. And by the way, in a study that I conducted like a few years ago in 2021, okay, I have shown that when teachers, okay, and it was in the English classroom, teaching English as a foreign language, we have seen that when teachers, okay, kind of go against and problematize the kind of the racist content, okay, in textbooks, and they bring, you know, examples about, you know, Palestinian identity and Palestinian culture and, you know, Palestinian history, we have seen that the students even interact better in the classroom discourse, and that the learning process is even enhanced when students are exposed and are given the chance to connect with their history. But this is not the case, okay, of, you know, all Palestinians or all of the citizens in Israel. And this is why, okay, you see, and I'm, you know, and you are right, Ingrid, okay, people, okay, there is a kind of, and this again brings me to the heterogeneity of the Palestinian community, that there is no consensus about the terms of reference. So and you know, as a professor at an Israeli university, okay, I might be sitting in a room, okay, with my, you know, with my Jewish and Arab and Palestinian colleagues, and each, okay, will refer to us, okay, in a different manner, okay, and you will hear the terms Arab, Palestinian, Palestinian Arab, or, you know, the Israeli Arabs, okay, in the room, because of the kind of the lack, or these attempts, continuous attempts to de-Palestinize the Palestinian community. So this was one of the main agendas, and I'm glad that we managed to theorize this under the term of colonized education, because it is a main, we have seen that the fact that, you know, de-Palestinization practices are so dominant, it kind of also control or restricts the domain of the sayable. It restricts what teachers and students will talk about inside the classroom. It will restrict, okay, what schools will be discussing, what events, okay, will be discussed in schools. And we see differences. We see differences in different, like, you know, it depends on the principal, the school principal, it depends on the teacher herself or himself. So these are all dependent on individual initiatives, but this is not what we want, okay? The idea is that, and when I present my work to, you know, to my Israeli colleagues, okay, this is exactly what I tell them, you know, okay, so this is what is happening in the colonized education, okay? You are like kind of restricting, okay? You are banning, okay, Palestinians from learning about their Palestinian history. You are banning, okay, them from connecting with, talking about the Nakba, okay? You are kind of delegitimizing or making the use of the word Nakba unlawful in the educational sphere, okay? But this is what is happening outside of the educational system. It is still happening, okay? Because Palestinian identity, okay, is nurtured inside homes. It is nurtured, okay, in cultural arenas. It is nurtured in hip hop. It is nurtured in Palestinian art. It is nurtured in the streets. It is nurtured in you know, everyday interaction, okay, of Palestinians with themselves. You know, people read, people hear music, people learn from, talk to their grandparents, okay? Grandparents, you know, many grandparents who lived the Nakba, okay, are still alive, and they kind of, you know, they tell the stories of the Nakba over and over again, and children and grandchildren, okay, grow up hearing these stories. So what is not being taught in school is being taught outside of school. So the question is, what do we do with it? So this is, and I present it as a scholarly question. So I hope that I answered your question, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bishara, for such an amazing, fascinating presentation. I'll invite Dr. McConey for the final words, and we can have an after party if there are any lingering comments. Dr. McConey.
Okay. Muzna, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I think your presentation illustrates the advantages of scholars who are based in different socio-political sites talking about their experiences and the importance of engaging with each other across the different contexts that we work in. So, for example, the engagement by people who may not be very familiar with the Israeli-Palestinian state, but are coming from another different context. And my suspicion is that scholarly, we are moving towards a phase in which we will all be expected in one way or other to be sensitive to more than one context. So, for example, it may be Southern Africa and Palestine, Southern Africa and Brazil, in order to enable us to compare how the same concepts play themselves out in a similar or different ways across different socio-political contexts. And the interesting thing about your work is that there is always a sense in which one is able to identify with what you are saying, but there's also another sense in which one is always contesting how you are theorizing it. That is the fascinating part about your work. And I think this is an excellent piece of work to continue developing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor. Thank you so much.
Then Kim of